Of course he knew. But for a while he just didn't know that he knew. Yes, I think this needs some explanation. You see, when you put blinders on a horse, it can only see what's right in front of it. But she knows there's something more. She can hear, even smell. But he doesn't see, until he turns his head. One day, John Fillmore Cunningham turned his head. No, one day people turned her. For him. Let me bring you up to speed. John Cunningham overheard two men discussing his wife's sexual abilities. Not in a hypothetical sense, mind you. They compared experiences, and they did it quite openly. The experience included words like slut, deep throat, and ass sex. He never associated these words with the woman he married 21 years ago, and even more so with the mother of his daughter. They were so far removed from the world they shared that he would never have believed they were talking about her. It was in a pub. He was there with colleagues to celebrate the fact that every week has an end, even this one. Two men were on the other side of the glass partition. It was only partially transparent, so he only saw fragments of them. Their voices were loud enough to be heard in the bar. They must have drunk quite a lot to be so relaxed. As I said, John did not immediately notice that their boasting might bother him. Therefore, he must have missed a significant part of their conversation. Most of what he remembered were poor reconstructions he made himself. He had to build it from what he heard later as he actually began to listen. And he started listening only after one of the guys mentioned her name. For example, that Cunningham slut from accounting. Hearing your last name this way usually makes you pay attention, doesn't it? And yes, his wife had a job in accounting at a large company, the name of which the guys mentioned only a few seconds later. What he heard was enough to make him listen. But as I said, the choice of words was too foreign for him to realize that they could actually be talking about Sarah, his wife. Still, it was enough to make him restless. He automatically moved closer. But it looks like they're already done. One of them burped. The other said it was time for him to go. John looked around the corner and saw only the man's back as he walked out into the street. He was overweight and bald on top of his head. John Cunningham had no idea who the second one could be. The place was... When John returned home half an hour later, Sarah was not there. Another half hour later, she still wasn't there. He wondered if it would have given him pause if it weren't for the idiots he overheard, or did he think about it because he felt there was something to it? Ridiculous, he thought. Sarah had the right to relax as much as he did, and she certainly didn't need a watch to tell her when she would be relaxed enough to go home. But she could call. She usually did this when she stayed late. She'd been doing that a lot lately, he realized. And he felt echoes of other evenings, nights, these last months, this past year. Another hour later, John called her on her mobile. It was disabled. He tried calling her office. The cleaning lady answered the call. She then hurried out the front door. What excuse would you not accept? Peak hour? Car problems? He could live with the delay. But 2 hours without a call? Maybe it was a sudden bout of overtime? Well, maybe. Although it's unusual on a Friday night, especially without her prior notice. In addition, the cleaning lady told him that everyone left a few hours ago. Could she have forgotten about the time she spent with the girls? Maybe, but this would be the first time she had been delayed for more than 2 hours without calling. As I already said, the brothers' belching had an effect on him. To be clear, she didn't use any of those excuses. To be even more precise, she didn't use any excuses at all. Just said hi. Then she ran up the stairs and went to the shower. Needless to say, she never took a shower when she returned home. When she came downstairs, she looked completely fresh. Her skin was a healthy pink color, and her hair was still damp. You should know that she was a beautiful woman, and not just by her husband's preconceived standards. A crisp white blouse and linen skirt hugged her toned body. She put on an apron and asked him to set the table. She then turned to take dinner out of the refrigerator. She didn't immediately notice that he didn't react at all. She put the casserole in the oven and went to prepare the salad. He still hasn't started setting the table. Something happened? She asked. She wiped her hands on her apron. This was the first time she looked into his eyes. Can I ask you? He asked. She just stared at him. What to ask, honey? I was worried. You are late. You never called. She furrowed her brows. Then she glanced at the kitchen clock. Oh, God. Now I see. It's already so late. I didn't even know. Her hand touched her mouth. She then walked up to him and put her arms around his neck. I'm so sorry, honey. I forgot about time. Her blue eyes were calm. They dropped a little and the eyebrows turned into small circles. The result was the look of a pitiful puppy. John took her hands and pulled her away from him. He held them between their bodies. Let's eat, he said. I am hungry. That night they made love. Well, maybe this should be love. But it was a disaster. John was having problems. His semi-erect instrument seemed to be lost in space. Sarah wasn't as tight as before. Of course she wasn't. She was a mother, and she was already over 40. Moreover, that night, it was not as big as usual, and not so hard. But never before had he found her as free as he did now. She sighed. Then she took the semi-erect instrument and began to caress it. John immediately climaxed. This should have surprised her. Then she simply turned away and pretended to be asleep. This was more than he could do. The next morning, they drank coffee for breakfast. John ate a muffin. Sarah had fresh fruit and cereal. They also drank a glass of juice. They were never big breakfast eaters. Sarah took a shower, but she was still in her robe. John was in sportswear. He loved to run early on Saturday mornings. This time it was very early. He did not get enough sleep. Sipping his coffee, he tried to catch her eye. It took him a while. While talking help, Sarah? He asked. She looked for several seconds, right through him. Can you help me with anything, honey? She finally asked. I think you're cheating on me, Sarah, he said. I think you're dating another man. Her face didn't change at all. Her gaze didn't change. Not a single muscle twitches, nothing. She just watched. Blood rushed to his head. He felt like a glowing light bulb. He could only assume that she agreed. He stuttered. Why, Sarah? Her eyes widened in surprise. Why, John? After a long silence, she said. Her surprise turned into a grin. Indeed, why? Why do you think I'm cheating on you? John knew that when she called him by name, it was very serious. His more common name was Darling. She must be offended, even offended, or at least excited. Why are you blaming me, John? She almost screamed. He raised his hand and asked her to lower her voice. He then told her what he had heard in the pub. He added that she was late without calling or even apologizing, and her unusual shower. It was all very awkward. Oddly enough, he was ashamed to doubt her. He had to pause or construct sentences to take the bluntness out of his accusations. She pushed the cup away. Then she stood up and pulled down her robe. I don't have to listen to this, she said, and she left the kitchen. John could have followed her into the bedroom. Perhaps he should have, but he didn't. Was he a weakling? Was it indecision? Maybe even fear. He didn't think so. He didn't think it was any of those things, because he knew what kept him in the chair. It was certain that he was right. He didn't need any more explanation. You see, Sarah has never shied away from confrontation. She even greeted them. In fact, she often blamed her husband for avoiding them. To maintain peace, John almost never went into confrontation. Or he backed down because the issue didn't deserve the destructive ugliness of an argument. At this moment, Sarah did exactly what he knew she hated. She was offended. She looked very offended. But she did not object to him. She did not challenge him or strike back. She left the battlefield without a fight. This was very unusual for her. And John knew why she did this. She didn't have a dissent answer to his question. And she didn't have it because he was right. Sarah cheated on him. When Sarah Cunningham returned from the supermarket, she found an empty house. This didn't surprise her. In fact, she has already bought less groceries and skipped the regular cans of beer. She also didn't take most of the meat. She expected John wouldn't be there, and he left. She found a small note and read it. Then she crumpled it up and threw it away. The kettle whistled. She poured boiling water over the tea. The weather was good enough to sit on the deck and enjoy it. She was sitting. And I enjoyed it. Did she regret that John left? She knew she would miss him, for ease and comfort, and memories. But she also knew that she had already forgotten him. She worked on this moment for more than 2 years. She almost never wondered why it was so easy for her to go behind John's back. Why was there almost no feeling of guilt or remorse? She guessed that she had lost respect for him. He couldn't win it, so why give it to him? He was such a non-entity compared to other men she had met. He simply gave in, always putting his desires behind hers. Perhaps other women would call it love and devotion. This annoyed Sarah. She had seen strong men bend others to their will and admired them for it. Stan, for example. This was the man. A small tremor touched Sarah's crotch. Frankly, it was surprising that it took John so long to discover her infidelity. It's even insulting, she thought. Another evidence of his disinterest. Sarah has been cheating on John since Julie, their daughter, left home for college. This was almost 2 years ago. At first, it was small affairs and adventures, flirting that got out of control. But in recent months, she had finally given free rein to the insatiable lust she had been feeling for years. She was once again amazed at how easy it was to find young, delightful lovers. She was a beautiful woman. She maintained her attractiveness. In fact, she spent most of the money she earned on this. Especially after she started working full-time, a significant portion of her income was spent on wardrobe, lingerie, and hair and makeup. She winced at the thought that John never objected, and did he even notice? She was over 40 years old. At times, she could pass for the mother of the young men she had sex with. But they flocked to her. From the very beginning, she knew that this was her life. She also knew from the beginning what she would do if John found out about this. If he doesn't accept this, she will prefer her new life to this dull existence with him. She will offer John a divorce, or she will agree with what he offers her. She will never give up this newfound life. But she also decided from the beginning that she would not provoke exposure. She will hide it as best she can. She would never have sex with them at home, and she would never leave without a compelling explanation. She also wouldn't make love to John immediately after having sex with another man. She felt she owed him this. In fact, she was proud of herself for being so thoughtful. Over the past year, she has shared a bed with several of her male colleagues and even some clients. Most often, this happened one-on-one in a car or at a party. But there were also motels and hotel rooms, and sometimes threesomes. All this was easy, pleasant, and gave great pleasure. This also helped improve her self-esteem, and this led to a promotion and a rather nice bonus. To her surprise, John gave no indication that he suspected anything. In their marital bed, she remained as conservative as ever. Their lovemaking was vanilla, boring, and, thank heavens, rare. She even liked this predictability. But now, finally, she challenged fate. Everything has changed. The excitement of the forbidden has long passed. Keeping a secret became more of a nuisance than an incentive. And of course, now there was Stan, and that wonderful thing he asked her for. Stan joined the company 6 months ago. Oh, Stan Milton. Tall, blonde, strong, rapidly climbing the corporate ladder. He was alluringly masculine, confident, powerful, young, stunningly fit, and recently divorced. Did she love Stan? If not, then why did she treat him so casually? Why was he always in her thoughts and dreams? If not love, then what made her knees weak? And Stan? Did he care about her too? Well, of course. He told her about this more than once. Why else would he ask her? Stan in it was heaven. He was far from gentle, mind you. He was big, rough, and unceremonious. And she enjoyed it. She needed Stan. She had to have it. She had to be free to become his devoted lover, walk with him along a new, exciting path, to be alive, to be young again. That Friday afternoon, 2 colleagues and casual lovers were talking a little loudly in the pub at her request. She herself spent the entire day having sex with Stan at the motel. She stayed up late without calling. Then she hurried home and did not make excuses. But she took a long time to shower. Even John must have noticed. But to make it even more meaningful, she made sure they made love later that night. He should have had a chance to notice her slobbering looseness. She was surprised that he couldn't get fully aroused. He never had such problems. But then it dawned on her. He knew, or at least he should have a strong suspicion. It seemed to emasculate him. She felt a brief pang of guilt, which immediately made her irritated again. The next morning at breakfast, she surprised herself. She couldn't admit to cheating when he directly asked her about it. She deliberately provoked this moment, but when it came, she could not utter a word. She let her silence speak. Why? Did she still love John? Was this the reason? Was it shameful? She grinned incredulously. Okay, in a way, she still loved him. It was warm, slow, and impartial, like old people. They have been married for over 21 years. A million ties bound them together, their difficult beginnings, their home, the life they built. Memories. Many of these ties have already been unraveled. She was sad that now, the last few would be torn apart. All except one. One will always remain, Julie. Julie was the only clear, glorious proof of their love. Beautiful, lively girl, smart, brave, young. Sarah knew that if she still loved John, it would be because of Julie. She sighed and sipped her tea. Should she suppress her active, youthful sexuality just because of a husband who was too boring to satisfy her, who was too old to give her what she needed? Should she blame herself for this and consider it a curse? She shrugged. If she blamed herself, it would be like blaming the rain for passing, or lightning in that it struck. In addition, denying herself this delightful sensuality would turn her into a bitter, prematurely aged woman. Who would benefit from this? Life, or what was left of it, was here to be taken. She was sweet and increasingly short. Wouldn't it be a sin to ignore it? Her cell phone rang. It was Stan. Butterflies flew up. His voice alone made her excited. Yesterday he told her that she was special, the best he's ever had, much better than all these young bitches. Sarah smiled and confirmed the date. It would be the first time to host him at home, but by no means the last. Sarah giggled. Life was good. She stood up and went upstairs to try on her new silk outfit. There was a spring in her steps. Did he ever know his wife? This is probably what husbands think about when they find themselves in his position. This is probably the most difficult question for a man. The answer may be to ridicule your entire existence, like a tablecloth torn out from under the crystal and porcelain, leaving a mountain of broken illusions. You may be surprised that he didn't see this coming. Of course, he saw how she began to move away over the last year, but he thought it was because of the empty nest, and he believed she had thrown herself into her work, going from a few days to a full-time job. But mostly, yes, he didn't notice. You see, many men don't live in the present. They live around him. Their thoughts are busy with projects and dreams, mainly about the future. They love challenges, to build, to create. They plan together and tell each other how important it all is. And of course, they should know how good they are at it. Obsession is the word. Because of this, John had a poor understanding of people. He almost never stopped to look at them, and he was no exception. Men are like boys on the beach who band together to build a sand castle, or in the forest will clog creek. The world shrinks around them. They only see the current project, the task, and they know they are safe. Their back is covered. At least that's what they think. When they plan their exciting projects together, they trust that they will be lovingly taken care of. Are they naive, or do they take it for granted? Women find it difficult to understand this point of view, and it is difficult for them to hide their contempt. At best, they gently joke about it and shrug their shoulders. Women live in the present. It belongs to them. They love to meet and talk, weaving a collective web that spreads in all directions. This is the fabric of the present time. It supports families, communities, jobs, even entire cities. It's a confusing labyrinth, and they instinctively know their way, but men don't. They don't even have time to see the web. That's why they fall into it so easily, I think. Women are sweet and beautiful spiders. They catch men. They envelop them. And from now on, men leave the whole world to them. John pondered his thoughts and realized that he was delusional. His thoughts weren't as organized as usual. Leaving the house, He parked his suitcase at a correspondingly dreary motel a few miles down the regular highway. Then he went for a walk. Or rather, he walked. Since he married Sarah, he had not taken such walks often. She was a city person. Her idea of a vacation consisted of beaches and shopping centers, tanning, and a general improvement in her figure. As a child, John loved to hike. In high school, he explored country trails and mountain routes. In college, he found like-minded people to hike deserted canyons and raft the wildest rivers. Then he began to court Sarah. She was too tough for him. I guess that's what they call it when a serious guy falls in love with a party girl. John knew that he was a strong but beige-colored rock for her frivolous sea surf. She was incredibly beautiful, and she drowned him in her passion. He loved her. He drank it in huge sips. He looked like a lost traveler crawling from a wounded desert. I don't think he ever fully understood why she wanted him. Maybe she didn't understand either. It was probably love. After all, when you can't explain what's happening, why not call it love? Or art? They were so close in those early years. They shared sweet and hard times. They found pleasure and fun in everything. We traveled and made discoveries. And they created Julie. She was an absolute gem. Moreover, her birth was difficult. It never endangered her or Sarah's life, but this meant that they should not have other children. At the hospital, Sarah had a hysterectomy in which the uterus is amputated. Is fidelity a sign of true love? John thought so. If Sarah had to, then so should he. So John shared her fate and had a vasectomy. He didn't remember if she was happy then. Last year she said he was stupid. What if he finds another woman and wants children with her? He laughed. He thought she was joking. As he trudged through the sand and tall grass, John found that he did not remember many of his recent memories. They all seemed to be immersed in a grayish soup. But as he walked, a strong wind cleared his mind. Maybe there is a kind of love that is not healthy, he thought. The one that eats away at your self-esteem. The one that doesn't let you see your lover's love fade away. And the one that makes you forget how you started to give up on yourself. He sat down on a fallen tree overlooking the valley. There he saw something he had forgotten about. He saw how the trees turned green in May, how blue a clean, washed sky can be, how sparkling a babbling stream can be. His eyes almost watered from an overabundance of new impressions. Like his brain, from the influx of long-forgotten memories, their pain finally broke through the numbness that had become too familiar to notice. You see, when they shot vain Hollywood stars in the old days, they used Vaseline on the lenses. It softened the contours and magically reduced wrinkles on a woman's face. John must have been putting Vaseline on his eyes for as long as he knew Sarah. Call it love, call it stupidity. But there, on the fallen tree, the soft, familiar veil disappeared. It was torn down, and he was left with reality. Is it possible to overdose on reality? Oh yeah. Just look at this man on the fallen tree trunk. Look how his shoulders shake. Hear his muffled sobs, which even now he is trying to hold back. When a dam breaks, it is impossible to register all the individual logs, debris that pour out with the roaring torrent. Don't even try. Just wait for the water to subside. Then climb into your worn-out boots and clean up the damage. That was what John was doing there in the tree. He was sorting through everything that was left of his life with Sarah, weighing logs and debris in his hands. He was amazed at how light they were, and how fragile. Except for one, a sparkling gem that lay in his hand and smiled at him. When he raised his head, the sun hit his eyes. It almost touched the treetops. He rose to his unsteady feet to return to the small, dreary motel room. A long shadow followed him. He needed to call. Mother? Julie? How are you, honey? Sarah Cunningham rocked her painted fingertips, stained with burgundy. She loved this color. Not very good, said the little voice on her phone. Sarah was careful not to let the mouthpiece touch her freshly painted lips. My dad just called me. He said he left you. Sarah Cunningham groaned. Damn. Did he really have to tell her now? Mother? What's happening? He had a sad voice. Sarah pressed the speakerphone button. She carefully placed the phone in front of the mirror in her closet. She then resumed painting the nails on her left hand. Darling, she said, smoothing out all traces of irritation. Don't be upset. Let's talk about this tomorrow. Can you come? Can I see you somewhere? This shouldn't be said on the phone. Do you agree? Damn, she put a blot on her ring finger. Julie's voice came from the bedroom. Are you separated, Mom? Why didn't you tell me? What's happening? Sarah sighed. Stan was supposed to come pick her up in a few minutes, and she wasn't even remotely ready. Please, honey, she said, trying to sound cheerful. I really can't talk right now. I have an appointment and I'm already late. Let's talk tomorrow after the gym. At lunch, in a small coffee shop? There was a puzzled silence. Sarah leaned towards the phone. Julie? There's really nothing to worry about, honey. Everything is fine. This is just between me and your father. You have nothing to be upset about. I love you. Daddy loves you. Please, tomorrow at 12. Julie tried to say something, but Sarah interrupted her. It's time for me to run, honey. Sorry. And she passed out. Sarah Cunningham stood up. She put on burgundy shoes with 10-centimeter heels and walked to the floor-to-ceiling mirror. She loved the way the heels lifted her. She tucked her white blouse deeper into her skirt, forcing her breasts to press into the thin material. She then turned and looked over her shoulder at her ass and legs. Crap, she whispered. You are so hot. The doorbell rang. Julie looked fine, if a little nervous. He thought about it. How can a 20-year-old girl not look great even when she's nervous? It probably all comes down to one ingredient: youth. The envy of old people and the taken-for-granted youth. Hi, Dad, she said, and kissed him. You look tired. It felt so good to feel her tight body pressed against his. They sat down at a small table in the back of a tiny Italian restaurant. The smiles never left their faces. The silence was quite normal. He liked her simple sweater and told her so. Sky blue has always been her color. Did you call your mom? He asked. Yes, she answered, but she had to leave. I'll see her tomorrow at lunch. Yes, he said, stroking his napkin. Your mother is a very busy woman now. Her hand covered his. Her eyes seemed huge. Dad, what's happening? The waitress intervened. They placed an order. John held back until she brought them wine, bread, and water. Julie, he began, turning the glass so that the ruby liquid sparkled in the candlelight. Your mother doesn't need me anymore. She sighed. What do you mean, Dad? What? He silenced her. Sweetheart, he continued, you are young. Everything is so new and exciting. It was just as new and exciting when your mother and I met. We fell deeply in love, and it was a unique feeling. We were convinced that we were the only ones in the world who felt such strong love for each other. It was. John paused. It was impossible to find words for the memories that overwhelmed him. He smiled apologetically. Expensive. If you want to know how incredibly deep our love was, just look in the mirror. This is what created you. His hand was now on hers. He felt a tear glisten in the corner of his eye. Julie stopped breathing. Oh, Daddy, she said. You were born, and we learned that you would be our only child. Well, you know it. But now I know there was something more that started then. I think that since those years, your mother gradually stopped loving me. Julie stared at him in horror. She then shook her blonde head in protest. Tears welled up in her eyes. He raised his hand to stop her. You see, honey, I think I've disappointed your mother. I think I should have been someone else. Perhaps stronger, more ruthless, more ambitious, of course, a lover of showing off. But I wasn't like that. And I never was like that. I thought she loved me for this. John smiled apologetically, drawn into the sadness of his thoughts. I tried to pamper her with my love. Tried really hard to give her everything I thought she needed. I believed I gave her everything she asked for, but she kept asking for more. But in the end, maybe this wasn't what she wanted at all. John realized that he had embarrassed Julie. She just watched, slowly shaking her head. "Sweetheart," he continued, wondering why his voice was so calm. "Considering everything, there's no one to blame but me. And time. You can't understand it now. I don't think I would have understood at your age either. But time is the great killer of love. It pulls and gnaws. It can turn us into these huge, sticky slugs. We are doomed to crawl along an endless concrete road where there is nothing but repetition." "Please, Dad, don't," she whispered. He smiled and touched her hand. "Sorry, yes. I shouldn't have talked to you like that," he apologized. "Because it doesn't have to be like that. For me, it was never like that. I had two unique people in the world that I loved. They made every moment new for me. They were worth every hour of my work." He sighed as the thought occurred to him. "I think by that time I was quite limited in the ways I could express my love. I worked. I worked for hours, weeks, months. Thought it mattered. I was wrong, wasn't I?" He felt Julie's fingers squeeze his arm. They brought snacks, salad for her, antipasti for him. He was sure that everything was excellent. He could hardly taste it. "I had everything I needed, I think. I think it was different for your mother," he continued. "And now I blame myself for not noticing this. You know, I had love for her and for you. And I loved the challenges of my job. Projects to do, things to create, friends to meet, trips to take. My days were full." John put down his fork. "With your mother, everything was completely different. In the end, the only thing that stopped time from destroying Sarah was you, Julie. But you're a child. You are growing. This is the way of nature. You must find yourself, find your own—" He suddenly fell silent. The threat of what he was going towards loomed over him. He saw how his words could make Julie feel like the blame lay with her. And this was the last thing he wanted. "Anyway," he said with a shrug, trying to smile away the clouds, "I haven't been coping the last few years. My love was supposed to keep the demons of time away from the woman I love. I failed." "Oh, no," Julie exclaimed. "You've never failed. You—" He silenced her again. "Oh, yes," he said. "My love was nothing. It was a child's bow and arrow in the path of a roaring bull. The indifference of time has entered our home. And it caught your mother wide open. She didn't stand a chance. And I didn't do anything to save her. Did I see this?" Julie was now crying openly. John blamed himself for causing this. All he could do was hand her his napkin. She was already 40. Time will soon make her an old woman. Her house was empty. You were not there. And I left a long time ago, in a sense. Do you remember when she went from working 3 days a day to working full-time? How did she start dressing sexier? Have you started training more? How did she have to travel a lot? Well, after you went to college, there were times when she hardly came home during normal hours. Julie turned pale. He hated himself for continuing, but he had to. Oh, she always had good reasons for being late or absent. It was a job, and who was I to deny her a career? I myself was absent so often. You see, she had every right to finally think about herself, and if I didn't agree, she was ready to explain everything to me. There was silence, and for a moment they both seemed at a loss for words. Perhaps there are no adequate words left. Julie took a sip of water. She didn't succeed, did she, Dad? Her voice was thin, like a cradle for dangerous thoughts. Perhaps it was like that at first, he replied. Perhaps at first she thought that her new freedom could be found through a successful career. I don't know. But now I know for sure that she needed more proof. Julie looked up. Proof? Yes. Evidence that she is still young and attractive. That she was still attractive. A force to be reckoned with. I'm sure there were enough men around her to massage her ego and convince her of the usefulness of some, feminine qualities. He hated the disgust of his words. Julie certainly lived in a world where integrity was a way of life, but to him, she was still a little girl, and always will be, he thought. Have you two talked about this? She asked. John had to admit that he didn't. He told her it wasn't necessary. They lived side by side, like ships in the night. He guessed that he wasn't even looking. She seemed happy, and he was busy. Maybe this is just for once, she tried. Maybe she will regret it. They brought pasta. The waitress took his almost untouched appetizer with her. He smiled apologetically. He was afraid that the plate he had just brought would share his fate. No, honey. I don't think it's a one-time thing, and I don't think she will regret it, or that she'll stop, dating men, because, dating men is just an expression of her real need to assert herself. She won't give it up. Dad, you have to talk to her. I don't think that would be helpful, sweetie. Her eyes were flooding again. Damn it. But if it means something to you, I'll do it, Julie. Oh, God, Dad. It's all so sad. Yes, it is. But now, you must eat. Sarah Cunningham found a table in the shade. Her hair was still damp from the shower, and her skin was glowing. Perhaps this is from working with simulators, or from the ultraviolet treatment she took. Mostly, however, she was glowing from the cream she rubbed in at $1 a drop. At her age, she knew better than to risk her delicate skin under the rays of the real sun. She started going to the gym after Julie was born. She had to exercise to lose extra pounds. Since then, she has been ruthless with her body. She went to the gym at least 3 times a week. In recent years, she even went every day. She knew it was paying off. She saw it in the eyes of the young people who constantly pestered her. She saw it in the mirror, when she tried on the same tiny dresses she wore in her 20s. She felt it at work, at parties, at the pool, and in malls. It even paid off here, with so many much younger, stronger bodies showing off their assets. She has not yet required surgical assistance. Her breasts were firm and her stomach was flat. Her toned legs were still gorgeous. And a few wrinkles around the eyes were an advantage over the empty, soulless Botox masks of her competitors. Sarah Cunningham sighed contentedly. She sipped the tall fruit juice cocktail in front of her. Her world was perfect. And then her pink bubble burst. On the other side of the terrace, a young woman appeared. She had the same blonde, dancing curls, the same flawless skin and sparkling blue eyes, the same cat-like gait, smooth and relaxed, legs, but her blonde hair was real. They shone more from the sun. The jumps were easier. Her skin glowed deeper. In her eyes, there was a unique sparkle of innocence, and her gait did not betray guile. There was no calculation in it. The girl did not even seem to notice that many eyes were watching her. She was just Julie, and that was enough for her. Sarah saw her daughter making her way between the chairs and tables. She felt a pang of jealousy in her chest. Oh, of course not jealousy. Maybe envy? Just a pinch of envy? She rose to hug her daughter, but her lips only kissed the air. We exchanged pleasantries, told the latest news, and ordered a second juice. Then there was silence. Julie knew her mother never made small talk, and it had never bothered her before. But now it was disturbing. Now she felt the indifference on which it was based. Dinner with her father changed her attitude towards her mother. This did not change her. On the contrary, Sarah seemed to have moved from the shadows to the sun. New details appeared, soft outlines became clearer. Julie saw her mother the way she saw most of the people around her, with a clear, analytical look, with the gaze of an adult woman, no longer a child, perhaps still a loving daughter, but no longer unconditional. She lowered her glass. Mom, you know why I'm here. What's happening? Her mother closed and opened her painted eyelashes. She cleared her throat. Oh, honey, what a pity. But it happens all the time these days, doesn't it? We grew apart, your father and I. That happens. I'm really sorry. I always thought that we would grow old together. She sighed. This is not meant to happen. Then she extended her hand towards Julie. Please, Julie, we both love you. That won't change. Please believe me. We will always love you. Julie just stared at her. She was shocked by the ease with which her mother uttered the most banal platitudes in front of her, her 20-year-old daughter. She just quoted all this crap from glossy magazines and shitty TV shows, and she clearly believed she could get away with it. Julie waved her hand in front of her mother's face. Hey, Mom, she said. Look, It's me, remember? Julie. Your daughter, who's almost as smart as you? The eyelashes were now fluttering in a brief frenzy. Was there a blush on the pampered cheeks? Another sigh. Yes, sorry, honey. I am horrible. Please understand I'm so upset. I really don't know how to tell you this. Why not try telling the truth? Julie was startled by her own words. She had never spoken to her mother like this. But the insincere woman in front of her provoked it. Sarah moved restlessly in her tiny designer chair. Her burgundy nails tapped the tall glass. For a second, there seemed to be a flicker of irritation in her eyebrows. Then she looked up. Darling, this is really something between me and your father. We both love you and always will. Please keep this away from you. John and I grew apart. We are no longer the same people who fell in love with each other. This happened. Let's please accept this and move on with our lives. For the first time in her life, hot anger rose inside Julie. Her voice seemed to be fighting in her throat to escape. Is that all, Mom? Is that all you have to tell me? The eyes in front of her closed. The corner of her painted lips seemed to tremble. Everything is for the better, honey. Trust me. At this moment, Sarah's name was heard from the entrance. A tall blonde man approached their table. He looked good and fit. He was about 30 years old. As he approached their table, Sarah stood up from her chair. Her gaze darted from the approaching man to her daughter and back. She seemed nervous, not knowing what to do, and the man knew. He pulled her towards him and hugged her. His mouth was already approaching Sarah's lips, but finally she turned away. He landed on her cheek. Hey, Stan, she said in a trembling voice. Please meet my daughter, Julie. Julie, this is Stan. We're working together. It was all quite awkward. Julie shook his hand and smiled at his soft compliments. She watched him as he turned back to Sarah. She noted the white polo shirt on his broad chest, the immaculate trousers, blonde hair on his tanned arm. He made a clumsy remark about how they could be sisters. Then he whispered something, leaning toward Sarah. She nodded nervously and pushed him away. The man laughed. See you, honey, he said. He then returned to his two friends who were waiting at the entrance. He said something, and loud laughter accompanied them as they entered. Are you having sex with him, Mom? Julie asked, when they were alone again. Her mouth became a thin line. Sarah turned pale. Then she got angry. Who taught you these words, Julie? I don't have to accept this from you. This is really inappropriate. Sarah was all in motion. Her hands fluttered, her hair danced around her face. She transferred her small purse from her left hand to her right and back again. Julie continued to look at her. You're having sex with him, aren't you? And for a long time now. Did your father find out? You're wrong. Sarah's voice rose an octave. You're wrong. We work together, Stan and I. We are good friends. These things happen, you know? It's 2008 now. Can I have friends? Does my high-ranking and powerful daughter really disapprove of this? It was an angry voice. Heads turned. Julie pushed back her chair. She cracked slightly on the stones, which didn't sound at all like her mother's voice. Do you really have nothing to tell me, Mom? Sarah stopped moving. Her eyes were now hard. I don't know what, Julie. The girl stood up. It's clear. Well, dear Mommy, it's your privilege. But please don't call me until you have something to tell me. Preferably the truth. Fine? Sarah gasped. She raised her hand in protest. No, Julie, don't. Do not listen to him. I'm your mother, please. Don't let him come between us. Julie had already turned around halfway. She stopped. Do you mean Dad? Oh my God. You don't know him at all, right? Have you ever heard of it? You're so pathetic. Well, Mom, have fun as you want. The blonde turned on her heels and walked away from the same blonde woman. Sarah's hands were clutching her purse. Go to hell, John, she hissed. Go to hell. For the first time since all this happened, John slept well. It's probably all about the walk. And dinner with Julie, too. And a plan, of course. It was the kind of plan that makes you wake up with a feeling of anticipation. The kind that leaves behind a rush of excitement. He makes you smile when you think about him. That's how you know it's a good plan. It needs to be done. Yesterday he saw Frank. He hadn't seen him in months, and he felt a little ashamed to call him now, but Frank was very kind to him. Isn't that what friends are for? He had known Frank since elementary school. After school, he entered a distant university. But somehow they never lost touch. They were able to meet again after he returned and opened his practice here as a psychologist. He married the charming brunette Marie, and they became good friends. They had 2 boys after John and Sarah gave birth to Julie. They played tennis, the kids played, they even took several family vacations together. Then, about 2 years ago, Sarah suddenly told John that she didn't want to see them anymore. He tried to find out the reason, but she did not want to give him details. She even told Julie not to see the boys anymore. John felt very awkward. Then he went to Frank and told him about Sarah's sudden decision. He remembered Frank being concerned about this. He then surprised John by saying that Marie didn't want to see them anymore either. He never found out why, and Frank said that too. As is often the case with men, they simply brushed off the misunderstanding and continued to meet over a casual game of pool or a night out at the pub. John didn't tell Sarah. She wouldn't understand. At the bar where they met, he told him about Sarah's cheating, how he found out about it, and her reaction. He also told Frank that he had left home. Then he told him about the walk, about the sudden change that happened to him, and how he looked back on the last few years, about the darkness he saw, or rather about the film of grayness, his feelings, or lack thereof, to be precise. This must have surprised Frank. They never talked about such things. He was surprised himself. As John told his story, he noticed Frank turn a little pale. He frantically clutched his glass of beer, and when John paused, Frank suddenly apologized. As a friend, he said, but even more as a doctor, he had failed him. He should have seen what happened. His outburst surprised John. Frank then said that John showed all the signs of depression, and he felt responsible, he said. He, the doctor, did not notice this. He didn't notice the numbness, obsession with work, lack of connection with the world. As Julie left home and Sarah gradually turned away from John, he allowed himself to get caught up in it, Frank said. John blamed everything that happened on his lack of interest and participation. Even now, he probably thinks it was he who drove Sarah away. But it was his illness. John understood what he meant. Depression consumed him, and no one saw it. No one at his job. Why should they care as long as it is functioning? Not Julie, who was only home for the holidays and a few days off. She was too excited and preoccupied with her new life to see. And during her precious visits, John always went out of his way to be great company. And Sarah? Oh, yes. Even if she had the time or inclination to look, why would she care? She was too busy being young again. Too busy freeing herself from the chains that an old hulk like her husband had bound her with. Even Frank didn't see it. John was a friend, not a patient, and John was always glad to see him. Their meetings were joyful. It was an escape. They never talked about problems. But yes, Frank said, he had to see. He began to apologize. He asked if John needed therapy, treatment. Then John told him about his plan. Frank chuckled and told him that he had always been a pig-headed bastard. But yes, it could work. Although you may have to cope with loneliness. And this is a sure path to depression. So please let him prescribe some medicine. John patted him on the shoulder. Today I received all the necessary medicine, he said. I feel excited for tomorrow. Now I'm clean and shining. We'll keep in touch. They drank more beer and left. John hasn't slept this well in a long time. Sarah Cunningham looked past the man's strong, handsome profile. Through a haze of unshed tears, she saw the plane take off from the runway. They spent 3 days in magnificent Vegas. This should have left her in a state of bliss. The familiar pull of G-force must have mixed with the clouds of butterflies in her stomach. But all they were reaching for was emptiness. Of course, in the beginning, it was paradise. How else can you describe 3 days in Vegas with a blonde god, all expenses paid? Apartments the size of football fields, brilliant shows and luxurious dinners, new dresses, risque underwear, her body bathed in a warm sea of compliments. But, most importantly, the undivided attention of her lover. She must be exhausted from endless nights of sex, avalanches of climaxes. Well, she was exhausted, sick, beaten, exhausted. These words also described her well. There wasn't a single bone or muscle in her body that didn't ache. Her skin was littered with bites and bruises, and yet, instead of being satisfied, she felt depressed, disappointed, shocked, depressed, and humiliated. Now, it was difficult for her to remember the first day. What an excited mood she was in when they entered their room overlooking the city. Oh, yes. Then it seemed to her that the number was a floating cloud against the blue sky. Her heart pounded in her throat. She hugged Stan and didn't let him go until he tore all her clothes off and fucked her into a triple explosion of lust. The bellman didn't even have time to close the door. He must have left the room embarrassed. Or was it envy? After that, they went swimming, shopping, dinner, and dancing. Then they returned to the room, no doubt to resume the sex fest. Sarah Cunningham groaned. Her face twisted at the memory. They returned to their room, everything was fine. They kissed and groped each other all the way. In the room, Stan told her to take a shower and get cleaned up. He said he would lay out some sexy things for her. So, feeling like a young, stupid girl, she giggled and went to the bathroom. Radiant and wearing only a cloud of expensive perfume, she returned from the bathroom. She nervously looked for her outfit on the bed, but apart from some pretty cheap fishnet stockings and 2 red sandals with crazy heels, there was nothing. She swallowed. Then she shrugged, giggled, and called his name. There was no answer. She looked back and didn't see him. "A naughty boy!" she exclaimed, picking up her stockings. Slippery nylon slid through her fingers. To make sure of this, she looked around. Maybe there was a beautiful peignoir hanging on a hanger. Maybe a cute teddy. There was nothing but slutty stockings and naughty high heels. Maybe she should find a black thong and bra from her own wardrobe. Or maybe the short, sexy negligee she bought just last week. Will she dare? Stan may be upset. He has made his wishes clear. She giggled again and sighed. A stupid, boyish fantasy. Then she sat down and pulled the stockings over her clean-shaven legs. The heels nearly toppled her as she took her first steps. It was all so cheap. She felt incredibly slutty. "Stan?" she asked when the door to the room opened. The man was huge and black. He was wearing a blue business suit, as were the 2 white men accompanying him. Sarah gasped. Her hands flew up to cover her nakedness. "Not that room!" she shouted. Her voice was squeaky. "Please go away," she continued. "You're in the wrong room." The men laughed. They kept coming towards her. "I'll call my husband." "Stan?" Sarah tried. "Stan?" But the men only laughed louder. When they reached her, they simply tore her arms away from her body. One of them held her from behind, exposing her breasts. He covered her open mouth with his hand. 2 other men stripped naked. Their male instruments rose from their loins. They were big, hard, and very ready. It was the beginning of a very long night for Sarah Cunningham. She couldn't even remember exactly when it ended. But when she woke up, she realized that it was already late morning, almost noon. Her body resembled a battlefield, only there was no blood. Just a lot of yellowish-white mucus caked all over her skin. There was the smell of stale sex all around. The sheets stuck to her skin, and her private parts seemed to be on fire, as were her breasts, ass, and jaws. Stumbling, she reached the bathroom. The mirror made her groan. Her hair stuck out like a sticky halo. Mascara and lipstick were everywhere. And she wondered what these traces of white powder were in her nostrils. God, the shower was so good. 12 or more jets surrounded her. They massaged her sore body. The hissing water at least carried some of her fatigue down the drain. When the steam cleared, she examined herself. The swollen red buds on her chest were topped with fiery bites and bruises. A sickening white stream was still oozing from the swollen red private part. She winced as she tried to touch her ass. Even the fluffy robe hurt. There was a huge breakfast on the side table. She felt raging hunger. The food was still hot. It must have been brought in while she was in the shower. She saw that the bed was also made. When she was already finishing her scrambled eggs, the door opened. It was Stan. He was wearing an Armani suit and had a wide smile. He grabbed her from behind. She squealed, screaming for him to leave her alone. He just grinned. "Rough night, honey?" She threw her spoon at him. He dodged with a grin. "Stan!" she shouted. "I'm done with you. You're a damn traitor who left me with these gorillas. What were you thinking? I feel so humiliated," she cried with rage and disappointment. He grabbed her hands and pressed them to his body. His face almost touched hers. "Humiliated, Sarah? Is it true? I'm amazed you even know this word. You really should see yourself on film, honey. If it's true that you didn't love every second of it, then you're probably the best actress in the world." He let her go. She sank into a chair. The towel left her hair. "Film?" she said in shock. He took the sausage from her plate, savoring it. "Oh yes, honey. And you know what's the best part? This is only the first episode of 3. On the plane, Sarah looked at the man next to her. The hangover weighed heavily on her brows. Thank God for sunglasses. "I thought that you cared about me," she said. Her voice sounded thick and viscous. He looked up from his magazine. "Who? Me?" He grinned. Tears flowed from her eyes again. He smiled and put his hand on her arm. "I'm teasing, honey. Of course I care about you. Do you know how much you earned for me this weekend?" Sarah just sobbed. The rebirth was brutal. Finding out almost 30 years later that you haven't learned anything since you were 14 can be quite sobering. Stan didn't let her leave the room. He sent a masseuse to treat her sore body. The feeling was heavenly. Stan fed her through room service. He also handed her pills and forced her to take them. Then he forced her to wear another slutty outfit, one made of black vinyl. The boots that came with it were again on platforms and impossible stiletto heels. He sent her back to the bathroom until he was satisfied with the sluttiest makeup and hairstyle she had ever worn. That second night, there were 5 men. 2 of them were overweight. One was over 60 years old. She must have passed out long before it was over. The next day, she begged him to let her leave. She tried to call. The hotel phone was dead and her cell phone was missing. In the end, she even threatened to commit suicide. This caused Stan to tear a muscle from laughing. Now they are returning. Sarah had been completely depressed the last few hours. She had a raging hangover and walked through the departure lounge like an old and frail lady. Huge sunglasses could hardly hide her suffering. "I hate you," she told the blonde man. "I know, honey," he replied and returned to his journal. John closed the door of his former home. It was no longer his home. He put the key back inside. The morning was cool, but I promised to warm up soon. Yesterday was a busy day, and the day before, yesterday too. Financial management had no special secrets for him, but preparing divorce papers was a fairly new experience. As well as being fired from a job where he worked for more than 20 years, he was supposed to give a month's notice, but he had accumulated a lot of vacation days over the past 2 years, thanks to his crazy work ethic. He promised to return for a farewell party. However, he knew that a lot of time would pass before it was carried out, if it happens at all. The last few days have been like wiping down an old-school blackboard. All traces of his life slowly disappeared into the clouds of chalk. He admired the perfect emptiness he left behind. The last thing John did this morning was walk around the house that was his home. Their home. It was missing things, mostly clothes, a few photographs. But somehow it felt right. The absence of all these tiny material things was nothing compared to the gaping hole inside him. He hummed as he walked around the house. He saw the photographs. He saw a book stand he made himself. He checked with a careful hand. She was still a little unsteady. He grinned. All the things he made himself had a certain personal touch. They either wobbled, did not close well, or squeaked when used. How appropriate. The last thing John did was reach into his pocket. He took out a rather thick envelope. It said, "Sarah," on the front. He placed it in the center of the kitchen table. He leaned it against a very ugly but beloved vase that Julie had made at school when she was 6 years old. Sarah will find the envelope when she returns, wherever she is. There were only 2 things in it. The first is divorce papers. The other is his lawyer's neat business card. He closed the door behind him. Silver camper shone in the early sun. John ran his hand over the aluminum cladding in admiration. The need to climb high into the cabin sent a wave of anticipation through my body. He sat down and took hold of the huge flat steering wheel. Memories came flooding back to him. He remembered sitting on his Uncle Jack's lap. His short, 5-year-old arms were spread wide to grip the huge steering wheel of his mighty truck. They drove, and he drove. Jack's foot was in a boot, pressing on the gas. It was all very exciting, and everything came back. Mighty roar of the engine, wind through an open window. Uncle Jack's serious voices in his ear. "Come on, Johnny, let's hit the road." The camper came to life as he turned the ignition key. John glanced back at the quiet house. The sun was half hidden behind its facade. A small black and white cat jumped over the fence, no doubt returning from a night walk. John loved the way the big wheels crunched over the pebbles of their short driveway. "Let's hit the road," he whispered. He made his first stop quickly. Julie's campus was about 30 miles down the road. She could easily have stayed home and gone to college, but she wanted, as she said, to experience all the sensations. John was sorry that she was leaving, but he never spoke about it. Sarah, of course, openly insisted on this, with all the right arguments about freedom and independence. At the time, John never thought she meant her own. He went into a small cafe located near the campus. It was still early, but that's okay. This would allow him to be with Julie before she had to go to class. He saw her at one of the tables. Today, everything seemed so fresh and new. Checkered tablecloth, penetrating sun, her wide blue eyes, a smile on her face. They hugged. "You're really going to do this?" she said. He chuckled. "Let the old man have his stupid boyish dreams, dear." "Oh, I believe," she giggled. "As many as you can find." They ordered breakfast. The smell of fresh coffee and frying bacon almost made his lungs burst from his chest. They talked about stupid memories. Not a word was wasted on Sarah. Time flew by. He looked at his watch and grabbed her hands. "Julie," he said, "I need 3 promises before I leave." She smiled. "Only 3? 3, John said. "First, become as happy as you can." He felt her fingers squeeze him. "It's easy," she whispered. Her eyes were covered with a film of moisture. "Promise," John insisted. She reached over and kissed his cheek. "I promise," she said. "Second," he continued, "talk to Sarah when she calls you. Give her a chance." The smile disappeared. "Promise," he said. He squeezed her hands in a vice. "Dad," she said, "promise Julie." There was silence. She took a long breath. Then she nodded. "I promise, but only if she tells the truth." John looked at her intently. "Good enough," he then said. Third, he rose from the table and reached into his pocket. He took out a quarter. It glistened when he turned it with his fingers. "Julie, I want you to flip this coin. Heads are east, tails are west." He handed her a coin. She laughed. Everything was fine again. The silver flashed as the coin flew through the morning sun. He returned from the zenith and fell into her palm. Without looking, she turned her hand and slapped it against the back of the other. Then she opened it. The sheer recklessness of what he was doing sent a rush of excitement through his heart. It was fate. The freedom to let it happen made his head spin. "Tails," said Julie. John hugged her. They went out into the parking lot. Julie gasped when she saw the camper. "Wow, Dad, he is big." He walked her around. She was impressed. Then he gave her a piece of paper. It had his mobile phone number on it. It was a new number. No one else had it. "I'll keep you posted, honey," he said. "Just you and me. Promise that no one else will have this number." She promised, nodding. They were both crying. The last thing he saw was a tiny wavering dot in the side mirror. Swallowing can sometimes be hard work. The first thing she saw was the key. She expected that due to mail and papers, she would have to push the front door hard. But there was only a key. It shone brightly against the background of the dark red rug. Only John and Julie had this key. She picked it up and entered the house. The second unusual thing she saw was an empty space on the wall directly above the sofa. There was no photograph. It showed Julie and John when they went to Disneyland 8 years ago. Why did she disappear? Who took her? Nothing else he was missing. She walked into the kitchen, wanting a cold drink. From the table, a white envelope caught her eye. Sarah, the sign read. She knew this handwriting. With a sigh, she sank heavily into a chair. A blunt blow to the ass made her wince. Then her hand reached for the letter. She stopped halfway. After landing, Stan left her to her own devices. Taking his luggage, he immediately disappeared. He didn't even help her remove him from the conveyor belt. She had enough money to pay for a taxi home. Now she was looking at the envelope. A sob shook her exhausted body. "Congratulations, Sarah. Well done, girl," she said. Her voice fell into the silence of the kitchen. Then she burst into tears. They lived 21 years of marriage. She cheated on her husband for almost 2 years. When he found out, she had no regrets. At first, her infidelities were erratic, but now she has a stunning young lover, and she didn't need an aging husband. The husband was shocked and confused at first. However, the more he thought, the faster the scales fell from his eyes. It turns out that the more he gave her love and tenderness, the more he gave in, the less respect she had for him. And the wife was having fun. She and her lover went to Vegas, and at first she was delighted. However, heaven turned into hell. She was raped on camera for 3 nights. The first night, there were 3 stallions at once, the second 5, and the third she had difficulty remembering. Afterwards, her lover said that he made a lot of money from her. The husband filed for divorce. He left an envelope with documents and his lawyer's card on the kitchen table in the house. "Quit my job. I bought a motorhome and went on a trip, deciding to fulfill my old dream." The doctor said that he had been depressed for a long time and he decided that his dream would cure him. 5-5. She considered her husband boring and rejected him. Life taught her a cruel lesson. Subscribe to our channel so that your second chaff doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think about listening to the next one.